Oh, yeah.
Well, I am delighted to be here today for this very special event with Dr. Iain McGilchrist and Dr. Chris Green. And Dr. McGilchrist is a towering presence in neuroscience and neuropsychiatry, and Dr. Green is a charismatic Anglican priest and theologian. And a thorough introduction of these two and a list of their combined books and publications would take the whole time that we're together. So I'm going to put that in the description and just get us underway here. One of
Right.
the things that got me thinking about this conversation was that I met Chris a year ago at a conference in the Northwest of the United States. And we had such great conversations, and it just seemed like there was going to be a lot of crossover between the two of you. And then the other
Hmm.
day, I saw that we had already scheduled this talk, and I saw that Iain had posted a poem by Hermes Trismegistus, who is often talked about in the little corner of the internet that I inhabit. And so I wanted to read a section of it and then have the two of you discuss it, maybe starting first with you, Iain, as to why you put this on your blog.
Yes, okay. Shall I read it first?
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes, yes. Okay. So at least part of it that gives people an idea. Nothing will be left to tell of your wisdom but old graven stones. Men will be weary of life and will cease seeing the universe as worthy of reverent wonder. Spirituality, the greatest of all blessings, will be threatened with extinction and believed a burden to be scorned. The world will no longer be loved as an incomparable work of Atun, a glorious monument to his primal goodness, an instrument of the divine will to evoke veneration and praise in the beholder. Egypt will be widowed. Every sacred voice will be silenced. Darkness will be preferred to light. No eyes will raise to heaven. The pure will be thought insane, and the impure will be honored as wise. The madman will be believed brave, and the wicked esteemed as good. Knowledge of the immortal soul will be laughed at and denied. No reverent words worthy of heaven will be heard or believed. Well, as I say, there's more to it, but it is an ancient piece of writing that struck me as a fairly good summary of the way I feel about what is happening to our world right now. That there is a turning away, or certainly has been. I'm qualifying that because, as we will discover, I have a feeling of a certain degree of hope that things will change. But during my lifetime, I have seen religion scorned and reviled and consigned to a series of old folky beliefs that only people who are not very well educated or not very intelligent would give credence to. And I've seen a huge inversion of the primary values. So things that are clearly not beautiful have been worshipped as though they were beautiful, and the beautiful itself has been scorned. What is blatantly untrue has been put forward as being the only truth, and if you don't admit that this is the only truth, you will be silenced. Goodness has been reduced to either a utilitarian calculus or a matter of ticking boxes on your preferences socially and politically. And this is a complete travesty of what goodness is. So I feel that these things have been travestied in my lifetime and that things have come to a real low. But I do think that, and we'll probably come on to that, that there are reasons for being hopeful, quite apart from the fact that it is a duty, I think, to be hopeful. What do you think, Chris?
I love that line. It's a duty to be hopeful. I think that's quite right. I've never heard this poem before, but there's a line in it just now. It reminds me of a passage in Exodus. Egypt will be widowed. It's not a direct quote, but it is a reference, I'm pretty sure, or at least it resonates with what the
Yes.
Lord threatens to do to Israel if Israel rejects the stranger. So in Exodus 22, we get this warning, you've been a stranger and I've brought you to myself. If you now reject the stranger, I will respond, and your people will be widowed. So there's this, your
Mm,
your
mm.
your men will be widowed. There's this strange hope in the threat, though. Like that's what I kept thinking as you were reading it. It's such a dire read, but you can only see things as having gone wrong if you have some sense of what right is and what is possible. So
Indeed.
it hit me just now for the first time the way in which lament and protest is really an act of hope, at least if it's true
Mm,
to itself. It's not just complaining.
mm,
It's
mm.
not cursing the darkness. It really is recognizing it's a grief expressing itself in lament and even prophecy of doom, but still as a way of saying, I can only
Yes,
say that because of what I know I should be seeing and still hope to see.
exactly. I think that's such a brilliant insight. That's exactly why I think it's so powerful and important. There would have been no point in posting it if it just was a long tale of woe and a complaint. But what it is saying is we recognize the value, the overwhelming importance of things that are missing from our world. And people often say to me nowadays, so what do we do to change, because I say we need a change not just of things we do, but of a change of heart. We need to have a different way of being, not just a different way of doing things. And that, and when people say, how do we get that back? I say, well, the first thing is to realize what it is we've missed or are missing. And I incidentally have a big interest in, that's an understatement, in the difference between the two brain hemispheres. But one of the things about the left hemisphere is that it does not know what it is it doesn't know, whereas the right hemisphere is aware of what it is it doesn't know. That's why it wants to learn from the left hemisphere, even though it is the master in my metaphor. It is the wise one, but it still needs to know stuff that the left hemisphere can tell it. But on the other hand, the left hemisphere, like a truly stupid person who doesn't know very much, thinks it knows everything, and therefore is completely blind to what the right hemisphere could tell it. Now, that's the situation we are finding ourselves in. And the first thing we need to do is to wake up to what we've lost and find a way to bring it back into our lives. And this is where a note of hope comes in, that I mean, of course, I'm an old guy. I live out of things now. I'm no longer teaching or looking after patients. But my general feeling and what I hear from the contacts that I have and from the things that I read is that young people now are sensing that there's something utterly sterile, barren and wrong in the way in which we have told them the world is. A heap of meaningless junk bumping into other bits of junk, and that's how things happen. And this is the story of scientific reductionism, scientific materialism, and I feel they're wanting to move away from it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, my daughter, who's a senior in college, your name came up in our conversation the other day because she's a
Oh,
senior. It's her final semester. She's taking a course in Persian poetry that she's been
oh,
desperate to take. Rumi and
wonderful.
other Sufis and
Yes,
Persian
yes,
poets. And early on in the semester, she's like, Dad, I love the poetry, but we're not talking about the poetry at all. She said, we're not being moved by the beauty of it. We're just talking about the politics of the historical setting in which the poetry was written and what's quote unquote really going on underneath it. And I said, well, and so I launched into my own account of what you've said, to take
yes,
something like that where she's
yes,
craving the beauty and the experience of
yes,
the beauty of
yes,
it. But what she's being given instead is a kind of mechanical, a taking apart
yes,
of the poetry rather than kind of letting it happen in its fullness and wholeness. So I think,
yes.
thank you for that. I think that insight, I first heard your work referenced years ago by Rowan Williams, And I remember tracking
Yeah.
it down then. This was before, the Master in his Emissary book.
Yeah.
And I read it then and thought, this is helpful. But it wasn't really until I read The Matter with Things that I realized, oh yeah, this is really getting at the
Yeah.
situation we're in. So, your name has been invoked in my lectures and conversations quite a few times, because I think you've put your finger on the kind of the sickness that is kind of affecting us all. Like, and it's done something to it. It's stupefied us, as you said. I mean, it's made us live in a kind of stupor that is
Yeah.
out of touch with reality, and therefore can't sense the beauty and goodness that's happening.
Well, and your daughter's story touches me because you may or may not know that in my 20s I wrote a book called Against Criticism, because I was a critic, as they now call me, a literary scholar, which is a nice thing to be called. I guess that's what I was in Oxford, and I taught people. And I worried about the way in which in the faculty people reduced irreducibly unique, implicit, embodied beings to a series of banal statements taken apart. It all became a handful of dust. Where it had all gone, it just reduced to nothing. And I thought, this is attacking the work of art. The work of art, the person who created it actually suffered to bring this thing to somebody's attention because they thought it mattered, not because it was a clever postmodern game.
Right.
And that by taking it apart, taking the meaning out of context, turning it into something general and abstract in nature, they had worked in the exact opposite direction to which the work of art was inviting us to go, into the realm of the contextual, the implicit, the unstatable, that was more powerful than what can be stated.
Yeah.
So thank you for you see, there's a thread in my work even long before I knew anything about brains.
Well, I wonder if that's because the place we sense it first is, and this is what she knew intuitively. As far as I know, she hadn't read a page of your work, or thought about brains at all. But she knew this should be moving me a certain way. It should be enveloping me. I should be able to get inside of it and move around and be in awe.
Yes.
But instead, it's in front of me in pieces. And I think just that intuition is already telling you both about what human beings are capable of. We have that capacity to see that we are enveloped, and also to see pieces in front of us on a table. But we also know more deeply that those are two different realities, and one is living and one is dead. One is experienced, and the other one is studied.
Yes, indeed. I know that we have so many things to talk about. I don't want to just carry on as we are, but I want to pick up something else you said that I just think is so brilliant, which is the way in which the hidden reality, I think that insight that in looking at this is not a poem of despair. This is a poem of encouragement, that we need to remember these things that are important. And I was reading today, at the prompting of a friend, an essay by Hans Jonas that you might know, I think it's called The Blessing and the Burden of Mortality. And it was very, very interesting, because I have a strong feeling that death is not to be feared or evaded in some way. It wouldn't be good if we could. But that death is, as Goethe said, life's way of making more life, and that it is part of vitality, and you cannot have life without death, and you can't have death without life. And that therefore what death does is bring into a kind of relief, obviously in the artistic sense of the word. It brings into relief the things that really mean something and are powerfully valuable. The values we have, the purpose we find, these things aren't negated by death, but the existence of death illuminates to us why they are so important. I'm not expressing it well, but I was resonating with what you were saying.
It is, and I think you pointed it out, but that play on relief, you just pointed it out in passing, but that play on relief is crucial, I think, because it's a way of pointing to the fact that death is rest. So one of the oddities in Christian scripture about death is that Paul will name it the enemy of God, and yet it's of course the death of Jesus that is the turning point of all things. And scripture is filled with reference to death as rest, right? That to die is to go to be with your ancestors, to rest, to come to the end. And I think it's because we need to make a distinction between death as the finishing of our life, as the what comes at the end that makes it whole. So think about the experience you've had, listening to a great piece of music or hearing a great talk or even a great poem, and then it finishes, and in that moment right after the end of it, you're taking it all in, but in order to take it all in, it has to have an end. It has to complete.
Yes.
What brings
Yes.
it into relief is
Yes.
that it
Yes.
comes to rest, and
Yes.
that's the good of it. Now what death becomes an enemy when it's just a rupture, when
Yes.
when it gets interrupted. So I think that part
Yes.
of what scripture is telling us is we were made for an end. Carl Rahner is
Yes.
brilliant on this, where we're made to be able to die as the last and culminating act of our life. This is what Jesus does.
Yes.
His death
Yes.
is his last act of life, and it finishes his
Yes.
life perfectly.
Yes.
But there is a way of death happening to us that's an interruption, and we experience that as
Yes.
tragic.
Yes.
Again, precisely because we know what death should be. So, as you know, in the old prayer books, we prayed that God would save us from a speedy death because
Yes.
we wanted to be able to die as an act of life. I want to be able to die
Yes.
seen. I want to be
Yes.
able to die in a way that brings my life to completion.
Yes.
I think that, so again, just your way of phrasing it brings that into relief, right? That death as the end
Yes.
does kind of bring a whole life
Yes.
forward. Now you see the whole of it.
Yes. Yes. And you reminded me of Nietzsche, who so often a fund of wisdom mixed with craziness. I mean, you can find everything in Nietzsche. But a brilliant thing, which I actually quote in the Matter of Things, is a piece of music is not what it is unless it reaches its end. But the end of the music is not the purpose of the music. So, and that is like very much like the business of life. But there we are. Let's. I know we've got lots of other things we want to talk about.
Well, so one of the things that is so beautiful about that poem by Trismegistus is it kind of orders our mind towards story more than towards fact. And G.K. Chesterton and C.S. Lewis, and I'm not going to quote them, but they both talked about this idea that stories can bypass the resistance that comes with propositional instruction and can kind of open our minds. And one of the things that Chris wanted to talk about were some of the stories in scripture that illuminate some of your thoughts about the left and right hemisphere. So I thought that would be fun.
That would be fun. Yes, indeed. I'm all ears.
Well, one of them, and this is a rather obscure story, but it's one that comes up a lot in the talks that I give, because I found it to be a story that enables my students, at least, to start to get their minds around what it is that you're pointing to, what it is that you're saying. It's in Second Chronicles, and it's a story of a king named Uzziah, who becomes a king when he's a young man. Second Chronicles 26 for anybody who wants to look at it. So he's 16 when he becomes king, and we're told very early on in the story that he's pious, he's devout, he has wise guides around him, he's being trained well, and he starts to meet with success because of his reliance upon the Lord. That's the way the text puts it. And he's meeting with success over his enemies. His flocks are flourishing, his crops are flourishing. But then he starts to invent and make things. And he starts inventing tools. He digs wells, Then he makes weapons, outfits his armies with new weapons. And as he starts making things, we slowly see this shift from agricultural invention and innovation to military innovation. And the text warns us, right, that he is becoming exalted. His fame is spreading far. So as you're reading along, the story is creating a sense of foreboding because you realize, I mean, this is a young man who was too young when he was thrust into this role, but was faithful and set on the right path. But as he's meeting with success, he's becoming, as we would say, full of himself. And then he, at the kind of the tragic turn in the story, is after he's conquered all of his enemies and has established his fame in the earth, no one like him before or after him, he goes into the holy place, into the place of worship, and grasps the censer and attempts to make an offering himself. And the priests, try to withstand him and send him out. And he's struck with leprosy in the center of his forehead. And he's banished for the rest of his life. So when I work through this story with the students, kind of line by line, there are all these resonances back. I mean, this is part of the genius of Israel's scriptures, but these references back to old stories, including the oldest story of Cain. That Cain is the one who offers sacrifice. And you see that Cain is called a man of the earth. And that phrase gets repeated twice in scripture. It gets repeated with Noah. When Noah comes off the ark, he's called a man of the earth. And which of course throws us back to Cain. But then here again with Uzziah, he's called a man of the earth and a man who loves the earth. And this slide from loving the earth and being a worker of crops to someone who essentially beats the plowshare into swords and spears, becomes a man of great power and military power in particular, conquering his enemies. And then what I point out to the students is what the story is showing us is that eventually when you've conquered the land and then you've found weapons to conquer the people, what comes next and the last thing is an attempt to conquer the holy. That you try to you weaponize the holy, you turn the holy into a tool. So when we work through that story, I then come here to work and say these are two human ways of knowing. And what we're seeing with Uzziah is essentially left brain awareness coming to have almighty power. Like that when at the centers of power and culture making and world building, you have that mentality, you have that kind of awareness. Then tool using and problem solving becomes violent, and then it desecrates the holy. And that image of him, moving from the spade or the plowshare to the sword to the censer, I think is a kind of image of the degradation. So I think I'm using it, of course, to kind of shift their awareness in another way. But I think it is a reminder that people have always known this, that what you've put your finger on and helped give language to that we can see. People have always known that there's a way of being human that's inhuman. There's a way of living life that isn't actually living. And it leads to this kind of degradation, to sliding down into more and more violence until you desecrate the holy.
Yes. And there are so many instances from around the world, not just, it's a brilliant example, but I found them everywhere from Japan and China to Native American people's legends that are basically, if you like, an awareness that there is in us something that is intemperate, arrogant, thinks it knows much more than it does know, unwise and grasping, and that is at war with another part of us that sees a bigger picture and wants to maintain a harmony, and that these things are, get at one another. I love the reference to Cain, because one of the things I mean, let's not go into this in any detail, but I think that the spirit of Cain, in a way, is very alive in our world. It is that spirit of revenge based on envy
Yes.
and resentment, and it ends in killing. And I
Hmm.
think that there's far too much of that that motivates a great deal that I see in the world around me. Envy of the good and a wish to bring it down and destroy it.
Yes. No, I think that's exactly right. And what you said about grasping, like that's it. Like this is the way I tell it to students whenever this comes up, that really there's a grasping mode and there's a glorying mode.
Okay,
And
good. Yes.
the glorying mode is the one we're meant to live from and with. And
Yes.
as we need to, we can shift to the grasping mode. It
Yes.
serves, I mean, this is the master and his emissary. This is just the language that I've found for it, but you've just used it again.
Yes.
And that if you get, as I say to them, if you get stuck in grasping mode and you
Yes.
lose that capacity for glorying, you lose
Yes.
yourself, you lose your
Yes.
humanity. And I think that it is, humans have the wisest among us, the artists, the prophets, the
Mm.
priests have been telling us this from the jump. That do not get stuck in grasping mode, because if you do,
Exactly.
it's almost impossible to get out of it if you're stuck in it. Like it takes some kind of severe interruption.
It really does. And because it is self-reinforcing,
Hmm.
and because of its blindness, it only sees one thing, which is more, 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 faster. Incidentally, I discovered recently that there is a Hindu definition of hell, which is simply more, faster.
Mm.
And when people
Yes.
say, what should we do? Sometimes I say, slow down,
Yeah.
need less.
Yes.
But there are other things that resonate with me there. The grasping is very much the right hand that grasps, which is the left hemisphere's tool. And when that is liberated by brain damage, you find people simply grasping, grasping, grasping at anything, trying to get something out of a piece of paper, a picture. They're grasping it. And if they have the other side, the right hemisphere is accelerated rather than suppressed or damaged in relation to the left hemisphere. You find these people are naturally making exploratory motions. They're looking and they're finding.
Mm.
They're in your sense they're glorying ultimately. And I'd say about prayer, if I may make what do I know, but just in passing a personal reference. I think, I was taught that prayer can be divided into four categories. ACTS is the acronym: adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication. And when I was young, I thought the biggest part of prayer was supplication and confession.
Yes.
And now I find that the biggest part of prayer is adoration and thanksgiving.
Yes.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because in a way, although supplication is not in a grasping mode, it is about what do I need to be giving in, to getting into me and
Hmm.
changing me. Whereas
Hmm.
now I think I am what I am, but I need to be aware of the gift, of the awesomeness of what
Yes.
life is.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
One
Anyway.
of the, and I'm no, no, that's really helpful, Ian. And I think this brings us to the kind of larger story, and I'm deeply grateful for the faith as it was given to me. But I was raised by old school Pentecostals, what I
Okay.
call sweaty Pentecostals, in rural Oklahoma. And one of the ways of thinking now, now as a scholar, I will talk about the Pentecostal movement as a kind of prophetic resistance to modernity and industrialization and the increase in technology, like all of those shifts. It's a kind of paramodern movement. But tragically, over time, even Pentecostal spirituality, which is all about openness to God and surprise, the miraculous, the need for passionate relation with God and with the world, it also becomes a technology. So that
Yeah.
under the
Interesting.
pressures of the world,
Mm.
prayer and worship, study of scripture, fasting, the life of devotion
Yes.
can itself
Yes.
become a technology. The what
Yes.
we call
Yes.
the altar
Yes.
call, which was this invitation to come forward and open your heart to God, becomes a tool, becomes a way
Tool.
of
Very interesting.
enacting your
Yeah.
control. And so there's a tragic way in which the powers of this present age can take
Yeah.
even our attempts to resist that
Yes.
grasping mode and make us grasp the grasping.
Isn't that brilliant? Yes. I mean, it's the operationalizing, as we would now say, of a whole way of being, you know. And I'm very anxious when people ask me, so what should I do?
Yes.
You know, because I know that they want a series of bullet points so that they can follow these things and everything's going to be okay. But until there is a change in here, nothing will seriously be different. We will just be blind as we are. And another thing that you brought to my mind is that everything that is good, like two worlds that I have worked in and that I know best, are those of the university and the hospital. And these are essentially good places that are devoted to good ends. But there is now an operationalizing mode, a managerial mode, a bureaucratic mode that has got into both of them and is ruining them. It's costing a lot of money. That's a trivial fact, except that we're running out of money to actually have medicines, and you know, and so the sublimation of the end of a hospital, which is a lovely, compassionate, healing mode, and the sublimation of the purpose of a university, which is to educate and bring out of somebody their power to see things, to judge wisely, to become wiser. These have been subjected to hopelessly left hemisphere modes, and that's very, very sad.
It really is. Yeah, I was in class last night talking with the students about, you know, there's a kind of mastery of knowledge, mastery of data, of information.
Oh, yeah.
That the sign of that mastery is how quickly you can, as we say, rattle it off. So that one of the ways in which we've confused a certain kind of intelligence as a kind of cataloging of information and your ability to kind of throw out the information with speed. I was like, but one of the marks of deep knowledge and understanding, as opposed to grasping a lot of information, but actually genuinely having deep understanding, is that your way of speaking, even the very rhythm of your speaking, changes.
Yes.
So I showed them this clip of a well-known leadership guru. And it was a 3-minute clip. And for the first minute and a half or so, he's just rattling off his points about what makes a great leader, right?
Okay.
And then the interviewer asks him a question and says, you know, which leader in your life has affected you most deeply? And the man quite literally sits back, and you can see on his countenance that he has to go to an entirely different place. Like he's in touch with his soul now. And he's not rattling off, you know, clever sayings about how to lead. He starts to tell a story about this man who saw him, recognized him, and engaged him in a human way that freed him up from some kind of bondage he was in. And that's what I'm showing the students is notice how, look at his face, listen to the tone of his voice, listen to the cadence of his speech, and learn that shift is the one where that's where wisdom lies, right? And anything that's really important isn't easy to say, and it doesn't come out fast. It doesn't come out in this kind of mechanical rhythm.
That's right. I mean, the most important things ultimately cannot be said.
Yes,
as has been noted by many great wise people in different traditions. So. Yes, I mean, there's something there that's worth just glossing a little bit, which is that the cramming in of information, which seems to be becoming an ever greater part of so-called education, but it isn't education at all, is not an education. It is just filling you up with data and techniques. An education is helping you to understand, and understanding is completely separate from information. And I mean, this is where we all know that there is a problem about artificial, quote, intelligence. The I shouldn't be standing for intelligence, it should be standing for information processing, which is what it does very fast.
Yes.
But intelligence and understanding are both very important and interesting words. And I just want to say something about that. It always puzzled me, why is understanding under anything? And I think that we've lost a meaning that was present in English hundreds of years ago, which is similar to the word unter in German, which can mean underneath, below, but also means among. So unter Freunden, when you are with and among friends. And understanding is not getting below anything or something that's somehow inferior. It's about seeing how these things all relate to one another. And intelligence also comes from a root meaning to read between, interleggere. And it's often the things that are not said, the things that can't be expressed, the body language, as you said, the things that you pick up, these are the things that give you an intelligent understanding. And it's true even of something like a skill like being a doctor. When I think back to the doctors that really taught me something, there was a lot of stuff I learned in books and I had to regurgitate in exams, but the doctors who really taught me what it is to be a good physician or to be a good psychiatrist did so by example. And I can't tell you exactly what it was, but I certainly remember feeling I was in the presence of somebody who was showing me something important. Anyway.
No, I think that this is, to come back to an example from the Pentecostal tradition, this is why I think speaking in tongues, this phenomenon of either speaking a language you didn't learn, or speaking sounds that aren't a language and yet they're somehow expressing something. I think that at its truest, at its best, that is a way of kind of resisting the operatization of things. But it is so easily turned into yet another technology. So I think one of the things that interests me as a theologian is the ways in which there are different ways to put this, but the Spirit raises up in us, raises up in our humanity resistances to what the powers are doing to us, the forces of the world, the way the world is going. We find ways of resisting that, but then the next temptation is to use the things that have emerged as resistances as better tools. Like that, now we've discovered, now I know how to use this. And so I think, to your point about when we get asked questions like, I remember once I was asked to give a talk on the problem of evil. And I started the talk off by saying, I don't think it's really appropriate to give a talk on the problem of evil. I'm going to do it in a way. I'm going to say some things today, but I don't want you to hear it as my thoughts on the problem of evil, because if I'm taking the problem of evil seriously, I can't distance myself from it quite in that way. And I said, so I'm not going to have any clever answers here. I'm just kind of putting it on the table for us to recognize and pray about. And so I finished the talk, and I'm walking out. I'm on the elevator, and this man stops me, and he's like, "Oh, that was so good. Thank you for that. Can you give me the elevator pitch on how I could say that to someone else?" Like he'd heard everything I'd said, right? Which I'm struggling to say, I've been asked to do this. I don't know how to do it appropriately. I don't know how to do it in a way that's true to what needs to be done. And he heard it and resonated with it, but then immediately.
Well,
can I interject here for just a second?
Yeah, go on.
Something just
Karen.
popped up in my salience field. So, Chris, you were talking about the Spirit and how the Spirit is providing us these opportunities to combat all of the world coming at us. And then we take that and turn around it and want to use what we've got from that as a tool or as a way to gain strength for our, some sort of worldly strength. And it occurred to me that perhaps that's because in our world today, we tend to see the spirit as a force rather than a person. Because you don't tend to use another person unless there's something really malevolent in you. But anybody will think of using a force. And I see a lot of that happening with many of the scientists who are learning very, very good things, and they're very useful things, but then they automatically turn it around and think, okay, now how can this be monetized? How can we gain power from this? How can we gain reputation from this? Because they're seeing the spirit as a force rather than a person.
That's a good point. Yes. Yes, I think the tendency to want to turn it to some obvious use is so deep in the culture that it's almost an inevitable follow-up question is, so how do I put this into practice? And I think there are things one can say, but I think they're often about not doing, not about doing. And there are a number of aspects to this. The Eastern sages like Dogen, Dogen famously says, when I was seeking enlightenment, before I was enlightened, the mountains were mountains and the rivers were rivers. When I was seeking enlightenment, the mountains were no longer mountains, the rivers were no longer rivers. But now that I have attained enlightenment, the mountains are mountains and the rivers are rivers. And there's a sort of unknowing that has to happen. Yes. And it's quite different from ignorance. So I say there's ignorance, which is what you have before you know anything. And there's unknowing, that is the end stage of your knowing, is knowing what it is that you don't know. And in a much more practical way, as a psychiatrist, I can say that very often helping people is not telling them to do things, but pointing out that there are things they are doing that are not helpful, and that it might be well worth just stopping doing them and seeing what comes up in its place. Because in a way, we're always crowding out creativity. We're always crowding out, if you like, the sacred. We're crowding it out with our clever ideas all the time. But if we just shut up and listen, stop talking, but instead hear, stop doing, but instead be patient and attend, then things will happen. Things will come to us.
Yes.
I sometimes use the image of a gardener. A gardener can't make a plant. A gardener has just two possibilities: to stifle the plant or to encourage it. And that, really what you're asking for is the ability to stand back, clear space, and allow something to flourish.
Yes. See what comes up. Love that, Ian. I think that's exactly the way to say it. Just this morning, someone sent me a Shezwa Miłosz poem that I thought I would share here. It's brief, but it speaks just to this point. Love means to learn to look at yourself the way one looks at distant things, for you are only one thing among many. And whoever sees that way heals his heart without knowing it from various ills. A bird and a tree say to him, friend. Then he wants to use himself and things so that they stand in the glow of ripeness. It doesn't matter whether he knows what he serves. Who serves best doesn't always understand. So like this sense of like seeing things in the glow of their ripeness. Like, again, that's precisely creating the distance. You stand back and you see what comes up. And so I think for those who are listening and thinking, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Well, stand back and see what comes up. I mean, I think that's about as practical as it gets. Stop doing so much, right?
Yes, I know. And of course, the famous story, true or otherwise, of Alexander the Great going to meet, who was it, the Stoic in a barrel. And he said, what can I do? And it is, stand a little less between me and the sun, That's the thing. We need to practice making space, because there is space, there is time, but our fantasy that we have to be doing all the time drives it away and diminishes it.
Yes. What I find as a priest is that, so in confession or in counsel, 9 times out of 8, I'm really good at math. 9 times out of 8, whatever's going wrong in people's lives is just a result of there not being room in their lives for mercy to happen. Like
Yeah.
they've literally crowded out all of the possibility for, and again, mostly out of an attempt to try to get control of their life, right? To try to, because I think there's this sense out there that if you work hard enough or if you work smart enough, you can figure out how to make life work for you at every turn. You can figure out how to get your hands around life, and your marriage will be perfect, and your children will be perfect, and your job will be fulfilling, and your health will be optimal, and your retirement will be set. Like we're trying to manage life. I think we all know this at some level, but we just try. So when things start to go wrong, we try harder. We effort more. We're grasp for more. So the wisdom that you're giving us, Iain, is just, I think it's life changing if people can hear it. Just make room. Mercy is trying to happen. Just make room for it. Let it come up.
Yeah, that's lovely. Karen, you mentioned before a number of things that would be interesting to go to. So shall we talk about some of those?
Yeah. So I was going to look at this quote from George MacDonald. Through the lens of thinking about the difference between opposition and opponent processing.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in relationship, like a marriage or a business partnership. So here's the quote from George MacDonald, which is from The Princess and the Goblin. There is this difference between the growth of some human beings and others. There are those who grow to meet the darkness, and there are those who wait for the darkness to overcome them. The one meets it as a friend and overcomes it. The other meets it as an enemy and is swallowed by it.
Gosh, there's so much to say about that. I'll try and be succinct, but it just raises so many important questions. I mean, one, of course, is how do opposites relate? And in the West, we think that they must cancel one another out. But actually, an important insight is that they exist only in their opposition in a way. It's like the north and south poles of a magnet. There can't be a north without a south. And you can't cut one off and expect to just have the other one left. So the cosmos is composed of what appear to us to be paradoxes. But I was talking to a very interesting Chinese woman the other day, and she said in Chinese we don't have this idea that it's paradoxes, because of course we understand that a thing and its opposite have a nature that is, I mean, they're very different from one another, but their nature depends on one another. And trying to have one without the other is one of the big, not seeing the dark side. This is so important. It's important in psychiatry. So people who don't realize that we all have a dark side. As Solzhenitsyn said, the line between good and evil passes right through the middle of the human heart. I think that is so good, and to come from a man that wise is great. So we all know that these things are there, and that there are shadows to everything, that something seems very good, but it has a dark side. And if we don't see it, it will come and defeat us. And I think in the modern world, people have divided things in the most ridiculously simplistic way, but this is typical of the left hemisphere. The left hemisphere wants either or. It's either good or it's bad. What do you mean? It could be good in some circumstances, it could be bad in others, and perhaps we need a bit of both. So we try to go farther and farther in a particular direction because a little of it seemed rather good. And so we go to huge extremes to impose ways of thinking that are neglecting a huge problem that is looming there, but they're blind to seeing it because they only want to focus on the good thing, on what they see as good. But we have to see that everything that is good can have a dark side, and everything that is apparently a hopeless blow of fate can be the means to something very good.
Mm-hmm. It brings me back where we started, Iain, that the poem that you read at the top, that one of the signs, I won't say this well, so you'll have to help me find the language for it, because I'm just now really starting to recognize it. But one of the signs of health is that we talk often about the dark, and not in a way that's obsessive about the darkness, not in a way that's, kind of fixated on evil. Not that at all. There's no fascination with
No.
evil. But one of the signs that we are healthy is that we kind of have a recognition of what gone wrongness looks like. I was
Yes.
struck by this first once, looking at the ways in which, we're living in a moment right now where we are so affirming, like we are addicted to saying nice things about people.
Yes. Yes.
But then that the backlash to that is we're also, especially online, unbelievably cruel and quick to
Yes.
say harsh things.
Yes.
So, in one way, there's a pressure on all of us to be really nice, to never talk. There's
Yes.
some things you just don't talk about, right? And everything
Yes.
is kind
Yes.
of politely kept to the side. But then what that creates room for is this really nasty backlash. Whereas
Indeed. Indeed.
if we were just more open about
Yes.
what's hard and what's gone wrong and what ugliness, what the
Yes.
darkness is, it actually creates room. So I'll name two things. One is in the Psalms, there are more Psalms of complaint and lament than praise.
Yes. It's
So
true.
in the gathering, Israel's gathering its songs and prayers together, and it says, of course, praise is where we want to live, but in order to create that livable room, we have to sing like this. And I don't want to make it a formula, but it's almost as if the more you sing about the darkness, the more you can kind of live in the light. But if you refuse to sing about the darkness, if you refuse to write poetry about it and tell stories about it and face it,
Yes.
then you
Yes.
end up living it in a way that has devoured you. The other is how often in the tradition, specifically the prayer book tradition, there's talk of how unworthy we are. So in the Eucharistic rite, there's this, call back to, I am not worthy to even eat the crumbs that fall from your table. And how
Yes.
that strikes us folks, us quote unquote enlightened folks, is, oh, you shouldn't talk about yourself that way. That's low self-esteem. But then we're the ones who are living with this crushing sense of unworthiness.
Yeah.
And yet we're seeing that language of unworthiness in the tradition and saying, oh, they shouldn't talk like that. So we're
Yeah.
talking in ways in which we're constantly trying to build up our own, we're trying to, we have such a self-help culture, a way of relating to yourself
Yes.
where you're so positive, but then we live with this crushing
Yes.
anxiety and self-doubt.
Yes.
Whereas in the
Yes.
tradition, there was language about unworthiness, but I don't know that they
Yes.
lived with the same kind of
Yes.
obsession with their unworthiness. I don't know if I'm making sense or not, but I think
Are
there's
you
a,
making perfect sense? I think it's extremely wise. And of course, there were rituals, ways of expressing contrition.
mm,
And but that doesn't mean to say that you have no worth. It's that you realize the degree to which you could be something that you've fallen short of, and you are trying to reorientate yourself again towards it. It's an entirely positive movement.
mm,
And I think that we are an age of denial, and the left hemisphere specializes in denial. When things are obviously wrong, it denies that there's any problem at all. What can be a problem with me? No. And yet it's facing the reality that there is a terrible problem, that a whole half of the body is paralyzed, for example. No, 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 cannot be. You know the stories. So they're in my books. But that, I think we live in an age of sentimentality, and
mm,
sentimentality is cruelty. Sentimentality has a very dark side
yeah,
because it is not true, it is not just, and it is damaging. I read a fabulous thing by Henri de Lubac the other day,
yeah,
and for those people who may be listening who are not familiar, he died, I think, about 30 years ago, but he was a Catholic theologian, he was a Jesuit, and he was a friend of Teilhard de Chardin,
mm,
and a great defender of him. And he said, to come to the point, charity without justice inevitably leads to oppression and changes what should have been a precious gift into a diminishment of mankind. I've not got the right words exactly right, but that is effectively. And this is what we see is people think they're being kind and generous, but what they're sentimentalizing, and they're not really looking squarely at what is happening. And the first thing we need, if we're going to succeed as a civilization, as a society, is to start being honest about things, to tell the truth.
Yes.
And again, Hannah Arendt, who I privately called St. Hannah Arendt, you said so many wonderfully true things, but one of them was that when a people start to fail to understand the difference between truth and falsehood, then totalitarianism will follow. And I already feel that we are on the brink of totalitarianism, and there's a soft totalitarianism that is governing the universities, the government, big business, what they feel they can say, what they feel they can't. And we should all just calm down and be honest. And then a lot of the, as you say, of the virulence, a lot of the power of the dark would be drained. It's like lancing a boil. The thing flows out and can now heal. But we can't begin that until we start being honest.
Yes, that's right. And sentimentality, I think, again, you've put your finger on something there. The Ivan Illich would, the philosopher, he would
Yes.
often come back to this line that the corruption of the best is the worst.
Yes.
And he said, this is so hard to take seriously at first. I remember the first time I heard it, like it took my breath away and put me on my heels. But he said, what has happened from the rise of Christendom, the shadow side of the message of the Good Samaritan, the message of Jesus' life, the shadow side of that, he said, makes you almost wish it hadn't come. Right. So for a Christian philosopher, a Catholic priest to say, he was also a friend of de Lubac and Desjardins, but he makes, what he's drawing attention to is that we have to face this, right? That Christian virtue, Christian faith has its own shadow side. He would point to the parable, wherever the Lord plants a church, the devil builds a chapel right beside it.
Right next door. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so, but part of what that gives us, like the integrity of his willingness to name that, he talks, specifically about the Good Samaritan parable. And he says, this parable, the shadow side of that parable is, instead of learning from it what was in it, the wisdom that was in it, we've turned it into a story about how we can be better Samaritans.
Yes.
When actually it's an invitation to openness. You never know who's going to be offering kindness and who's going to need it. You can't actually control the world in the ways that you think you can, right? That this is a parable about openness and about the mercy of God breaking in spite of everything. And yet we've turned it into, let's identify how to be better Samaritans. And so I think in what you're saying here, Illich is reminding me, like, we have to be keen to, part of being wise, I think, part of being discerning is recognizing the better something is, the longer its shadow. And
exactly.
How do we honor that in the way that we live?
And to be again very honest, we've seen some of that demonstrated by revelations about the church. I mean, a number of different churches. I'm not pointing a finger at anybody here, but the fact is that a church that is capable of so much goodness is not, the fact that it is capable of so much wickedness is built into that and should never have been thought impossible. The problem was not seeing the dark side. And it's a mistake to say that because it has a dark side, it can't have a good side. This is the left hemisphere again. This is an argument that leads towards improvement, not towards abolition. The church needs to be better. Yes. But it's not a sign that the church has no goodness, of course. I think all these things are important. And your quote from Ivan Illich was there in Shakespeare. Lilies that fester smell far worse than weeds. So, this is something humanity knows, and we seem to be forgetting it all over the place. And another thing that, just an observation that I think is important, is that parents think that they need to be good parents by being always affirming, never
Right.
saying no.
Yes.
Now, this is crazy. And the result is a lot of very unhappy, neurotic, insufferable children. I mean, you see them in public nowadays. I mean, they're usually Western children. And I notice that when I've been in the East, I have seen none of this behavior from children because it's not that they're horribly treated or anything by their parents, of course not, but there are proper boundaries and they know their parents are watching them, but not helicoptering around them and fussing them, always interacting with them and always paying attention to them. No, the children learn there is an adult world and they become part of it. They listen, they play, and the mothers particularly, but the parents are there. And these children, you know, I was in Burma years ago for a couple of weeks, but I did go explore a lot, and I took trains and I took boats, and I went to villages and so on. And in 2 weeks, I never heard a single child wailing and crying. I never heard a single one. It struck me. And yet, our children are so unhappy because they always have to be the focus of attention and everything they do has to be marvelous. No, they know that's a lie. And we need to, for them to be safe and responsible and grow up as mature citizens that will make good parents themselves, they need to have the assurance of their parents being truthful about what is good and what is bad.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and
I'd like
yeah,
to
that's
weave
right.
a little story in here that ties
Yes,
together
please.
what you're talking about, Ian, with the left hemisphere, and then this thing that's happening on the other side of the kind of weaponized compassion or the devouring mother with too much sympathy. And what you just said about children in this culture, I think it's because they lack boundaries. A child
Yeah.
is looking for a fence so they know how far to go and no farther, right? But if I think of your bird with the left and right hemisphere, the left hemisphere is grasping for that grain of wheat in amongst the gravel, and the right hemisphere is aware of the environment, aware of where enemies might be, and that's the light, that's the light of both hemispheres, right? But when you talk about the left hemisphere grasping in a way that's destroying our culture, that's kind of the shadow side of the left hemisphere. But it seems to me there's also a shadow side of the right hemisphere that goes towards this weaponized compassion thing. And there is a bright and giving side of the left hemisphere that protects. I mean, if the right hemisphere sensed some enemy around, the left hemisphere would immediately go into action and make sure that action was taken rather than just sitting around and, well, maybe it is, and maybe there's some enemies here, maybe there aren't, but the left hemisphere acts. So it seems to me there's a shadow and a light for both hemispheres. Am I right?
Yes. You are absolutely right, because there is this duality, if you like, or I prefer to use the word dipolarity, which is another matter. Duality makes it two separate, but it's a dipolar thing. So every good has there's a picture by MC Escher, which I include in The Matter with Things, which shows a picture apparently of angels. And
Oh,
then in between the angels, there are pictures of devils. You don't see them first, but every angel has its devil, and every devil has its angel. We need to be aware of this, that we don't live in a universe where there is just only one thing. And that is why God, in the Christian tradition, came to be part of the suffering of the world, to show them a way of forward that would be a reconciliation of these elements. And that the problem is we seem to have forgotten this. So you're absolutely right. There is good and there is bad in everything, ultimately. I think there's also a kind of a sort of failure of duty I mean, I hate to keep coming back. I won't say any more about the parenting thing, but I've been traveling most of this year, so I've had to spend an awful lot of time in public transport of various kinds. And the complete inability of parents to go, now that's enough of that. Now come in here. Let me give you a cuddle and I'll read you a story. Look at this. The things my mother used to do with me. You know, it was clear, it was firm, but it was good. But they don't want to because they just want to be constantly their children's friends. But grow up. You know, you are of a different generation and you have different responsibilities. You're not your children's friends. And when patients used to come to me and say, oh, my mother is my best friend, they thought that was wonderful. And alarm bells started ringing immediately in my mind because she can be a wonderful person, but she can't be your best friend. If she still is, there's an unhealthy something going on there.
Yes, I think for a lot of people, again, in my work as a priest mostly, I see this over and over again. I mean, how much anguish there is in the world over parents grieving what they can't do for their kids.
Oh,
And
yeah.
one of the things I've learned myself, not been easy to learn, and have tried to help other people learn, is that, you know, what you actually need to give your kids is not mysterious
No,
and it's not impossible.
it's
Like
love.
what you exactly right. You can
It's
be there
love.
for them and care about them. What
Yes,
you cannot do is manage their life for them in such a way that life straightens out in front of them perfectly.
of
Like you
course not.
cannot do that. But there is a pressure on, I think maybe especially younger parents, people younger than I am, to think that's what they're supposed to do.
Yes,
And
yes.
of course, there are huge scale problems here. I mean, this is one of the unintended consequences of what living in a capitalist economy that splintered our families up because we're all moving for the sake of jobs.
Yeah,
And so we
sure.
don't
Yeah,
live
exactly.
in networks anymore. We don't have family to grow up around. So we're isolated and our relationship to our kids changes because of that, I think.
Absolutely. And you know, to make myself even more unpopular, a lot of good may have been done, but a lot of harm has been done by the idea that women must be out of the home and in a factory. I mean, at the end of a lifetime, it's infinitely more fulfilling to have brought and nourished human beings into the world, to have helped society forward in a benign way, than to have been the HR manager at PwC. I mean, what the hell? You know, go to your grave thinking, well, what did I do that for? And of course, you know, we don't have time to go into all the details and the ramifications and so on. So what I'm not saying is that it is bad that women should have jobs if they want them, and they should pursue careers if they have a talent for them. But the fact that people are made to feel somehow inferior because they actually are at home being that all present love that is needed for a family, needed for children, needed for the husband, needed for themselves, needed for society. So I feel quite strongly about that. I'm glad to say
I'll
that quite
speak
a
for
lot
the
of
women
women
here
are
for just
saying
one
this now.
second.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah, a
speak for
lot
the
of
women.
women are saying this. Yeah, yeah.
I have a 55-year-old daughter and a 31-year-old daughter. The 55-year-old I raised while working full time.
Mm.
And then my life changed significantly. And when I remarried, I had the opportunity to be a stay-at-home mom. There is no comparison. There is no comparison. And being a stay-at-home mom is not a stale,
No.
empty life. During being a stay-at-home mom, I had an opportunity to learn to be an artist and to think about things and read and contemplate and serve people and be creative in many, many environments. And it's just heartbreaking to see how many women are clinging to that old model of the only way I can be important is if I'm out in the workplace.
Yeah. Anyway,
I
no, I
think
agree with you wholeheartedly. But what I'm not saying is that that may be true of every person. I'm
sure.
just saying that in general, we need to shift things massively so that we are much more respectful of a mother's role. I mean, unfortunately, feminism has contributed to the diminishment of women because they're just men who maybe don't do what the other men seem to be able to do. So this is terrible because there's so much that women do so much better than men. Let them do it, is what I say. But everybody, no, I'm not saying that you must be anything at all, no. But I just think overall our society would benefit from it. Gosh, I didn't know we were going to go there, but...
Well, I just a quick comment about that, I think, to make, and then I want to ask you a question, Iain, if it's all right with Karen. Karen, let's stay with your plan, but if there's room, I want to ask.
Well, there's plenty of room. Go for it.
Okay, but a comment here about, like, however we see justice for and equality for men and women, I think we have to face two facts for sure. We have to reckon with these two facts. One is, in the tens of thousands of years that human beings have been on this planet, we've accumulated wisdom for living a certain way. And over the last three generations in our quote unquote developed world, we've broken with that wisdom. We've discarded that wisdom. For good or bad, we've discarded much of it. And we don't have any wisdom to replace it. So even if you think this is a progress, even if you think this is where we should go, you have to at least admit we're going forward into a future that we think is going to be better, but we don't have accumulated wisdom to work with. And no matter what else you think, you have to reckon with that. What are you going to do with parenting, with marriage, with work, with prayer, with with politics, if you can't rely on accumulated wisdom? Where is that going to come from? You've got to reckon with that. The other is, and they're related, of course, is we've also broken with the rhythms of nature. So, again, what we've accumulated over these generations of human being is a way of living in harmony with nature. We no longer do.
No.
So we're out of rhythm with nature, like quite literally out of rhythm with nature, and we're breaking with received tradition. So what are we going to do then? Even if you want to say, in the your wildest fantasies about human progress, you want to say we're going to make a better, more human future. How are you going to do it if you're out of rhythm with nature and you've broken with received tradition? I think like that. It seems to me that all of us can get to those questions, no matter what our politics is.
And I'd add broken with God.
Yes.
And I'm sure you would agree with me. And just incidentally, I didn't know this until I'd almost finished writing The Matter with Things, but the three things that the psychology literature shows are most important for people are the sense of fellow feeling with other human beings with whom they share values. Now, those values probably come from a tradition, from a culture, and they can trust them because they know how they think, and they can share their meals, their houses, they can call on one another for help, and they respect one another. That is number one. Number two is closeness to nature, and to repeat myself for the umpteenth time, not the environment, which is some technical term for something that surrounds us, but nature is inside us, and we are in nature, and we come from it and go back to it. And the third is and this is actually the most powerful effect on physical health as well as mental health and spiritual health, is the connection with something sacred or divine in your life. If you don't have that, the evidence shows that we suffer in every respect. So those things are, if you like, the wisdom. They were part of a tradition that knew this. Now, people nowadays misunderstand a culture and misunderstand a tradition. To deal with culture first, we think it's okay that we just destroy a culture. The Industrial Revolution started this because it took people who had been living in certain village, perhaps their ancestors for 1,000 years, and they knew that place, and their ancestors were buried in the churchyard and all the rest, and they took them into a city and put them in inhuman circumstances in a factory, And that helped them to lose their culture unless they clung to the church. So it did have the effect that a lot of these people sort of thought, well, the church is the thing that can save us. But their culture is also important, very important. And we now think that it's perfectly okay to have something called multiculture. Well, there isn't. What there is kindness and compassion between people in a community. But if you choose to live in a certain community, you must become part of that community. You can't just say, well, we're going to be an indigestible lump. If you want to be an indigestible lump, then I'm sorry, my answer is don't do that here. You have to do that somewhere where you can be digestible. So all these things I'm saying are things you're not allowed to say anymore, but I do think they're right. And I'm not being critical of other groups in our society. I think they contribute a lot, and some of them have great virtues, and of course, but I'm just saying that all that to one side, it's not about good and bad, it's about a culture needs to thrive, and it can only do so if it is cohesive. So that's the first thing. So people think, oh, we can't be doing with culture, that's the past. But hang on, we are the descendants of literally millions and millions of years of history. We can't just suddenly in 3 generations, as you say, throw all that away. The history is there in us, in any case, even if we don't think about the valuable cultures that we have grown and brought into being over the last couple of thousand years. But the other one is tradition. Tradition is a living, flowing, changing thing. It is not a moribund, ossified, never to be changed anything. So a tradition is what enables you to change. Without a tradition, you make big mistakes. You say, oh, we're going to break with everything in the past and we're going to say it was all wrong and we're going to destroy it. And then you're faced with, just as you were saying, where are you going to find it all? Do you think you're going to reinvent thousands of years of wisdom? Your little puny self in Manchester in 2025 or whatever it is? No, you're not. So it's a recipe for suicide to not learn from the distillation of the wisdom of the past. Now, that doesn't mean that nothing can change. It means the opposite. It means that things now have a steady ground on which they can change. And if you look back over the last 1,000 years of Western history, as I have done and have written about, and more than that, the last couple of thousand years, what you see is that societies changed very much in their ways of thinking, their priorities, and so forth. But they didn't have this let's rip up tradition attitude, at least not mainly, until some of the reformers had it, I'm afraid, and that was a problem, I think, for a while. And then one of the children of the Enlightenment has been that the past has no relevance because the only thing that matters is logic. But I'm afraid logic will leave you barren when it comes to all the important things like love, the awesome nature of the natural world, of the beauty of art, of music, of architecture, of myth, of narrative. Mm-hmm. These are the ways in which the great truths can be conveyed. And I think that was something, Karen, that you mentioned before we started. But the myth has come to mean an untruth, but actually in its origin, it meant the big truths. And in the classical Greek era, mythos was the only way in which the big truths could be conveyed, because they can't be construed in everyday language, in the kind of language that's suited to making a dishwasher manual. Partly because, of course, things are necessarily dipolar. They bring together opposites. They confound our everyday language. And therefore, a story will bring this to life for you. But logos, from which we get logic, was thought the petty kind of understanding that a lawyer would use in court. No, would he owes you 30 shekels and you owe him whatever? That's fine for that. But for understanding the big truths, we need something else. And my last thing I'll say on this is, it just reminds me that Niels Bohr, who after all is considered the founder of modern quantum physics, said, the opposite of a great truth is another great truth.
Yes.
And this is obviously not true at the trivial level. I sometimes say, I either did have milk in my coffee this morning or I didn't. I'm not suggesting that there's two ways about it. But when it comes to the really big issues that matter, that give meaning to life, purpose to it, direction to it, these are areas in which a thing and its opposite have to be negotiated. And the best way this can be done is in poetry, in narrative, in myth, and in ritual.
Mm-hmm. And in that, all of those are in part ways of making the room where things can emerge. I think
Exactly.
this Karen asked us a question about oppositional thinking, and it sets up the question I want to ask you about play. But I think it's worth saying this too here, that it's precisely because, in my case, and I know I don't want to speak for you, but this is what I hear in you, is if we care about equality, then we have to know how to think rightly about difference. If we care about the stranger and we care about making room for those who have come to us in desperation, we have to think about stability and culture. I'll sometimes say to my friends, my students, those I'm pastoring, that in order to actually show hospitality, you have to have a home. You have to have a place that's yours, that has a certain rhythm, that has walls and doors that lock. You have your way of living that you then can open up to those who are not yours. But hospitality is not possible if you have no doors, no windows, no walls, no locks. If you don't have a life that's yours, there's nothing to invite people into. So I think if we could think oppositionally a little, if we would just start to think like that, we would realize that precisely because we think all human beings are made in the image of God and should be given equal rights and goods, precisely because we care about that full equality, we have to be able to rightly name and honor difference, and so on down the line. I think that, like, if we could just shift the terms of the conversation.
Yes.
And if we can't shift the terms of the conversation, we're going to keep having, rage battles in which, we're denouncing each other in meaner and meaner ways. But somehow we've got to shift the mode of our conversation. And I think oppositional thinking is a way to that.
I think that's absolutely right. And equality is a legal concept, and it is a very important one that I fully support. But it doesn't mean sameness, that everything is the same and everyone is the same. They're not. They vary vastly in all sorts of ways, and that's great, because although we want unity, we also want difference. And without the two of them working together, there isn't a world, there isn't a life. So I thoroughly agree with that. And it just reminded me that I had spent some time recently with a wonderful aged Buddhist priest, monk, formerly a monk, and he talked about a thing that's been a very big part of his life, which has been being a mendicant in a way, traveling with nothing, having just a bowl to ask for food and always getting it. And I said to him, and he said, this is the way we should be. And I said, well, I agree with you wholeheartedly, but we can't all be that, because some people have to have the houses that you knock on the door of and expect to get food from. We can't all be mendicants traveling all the time. So there is a place for that, but there is a place for something else.
Yes.
And
totally.
that's surely what anybody would understand from leading an observant life. And it's also recognized in the church. There are monks who are mendicants, and there are monks who are not, and this is absolutely as it should be. One is not the right answer. There is no one right answer.
That's right. And again, mercy wants to come, but it comes differently each time for each one of us. And in the Gospels, Jesus performs many miracles, but he has no technique for miracle working. Like, he doesn't have a method. Right? He heals. Like, sometimes he spits in the ground and makes mud, sticks it on people's eyes and tells them to go wash it off. I mean, but we don't see him doing that every time, right? It's not a routine for him. So I think these are hard conversations to have, of course, about parenting. These are the places where people are wounded most deeply, and they're also most anxious. But
Yes,
I think that, Iain, your work is a reminder to us that human flourishing and healing depends upon being able to hold all this together and staying at the table long enough to start to see that
exactly.
bigger picture emerging. So thank you for that. So
Yes,
this is the question I wanted to ask. So Nicholas of Cusa, who of course talks about the coincidence of opposites, and
exactly. Yes.
and I know you've written some about that. I just recently found something else I was writing. I stumbled onto a little piece that he did. Well, it's not too little. I think it's 2 volumes, but for him, it was it was a small project. But about what he called the Jesus bowling game. So the story goes like this, and people can Google it and find instances of this themselves. But essentially, he comes to Rome. He's serving the curia there, and bowling has is all the rage. Like the game has been invented and it's passed around now, and so he's invited to give a talk about the kind of philosophical significance of this game everyone's playing. And he ends up inventing a game that he calls Jesus bowling, and it has a kind of a map in which right at the center, it looks like a labyrinth, and right at the center is the winning, the winning place. You're trying to roll your bowling ball to that center, but all through the labyrinth there are other circles that have some point. There are 34 circles total, the one in the centermost being the winning one. And then contestants have these bowling balls that they have to roll. But here's the trick. The bowling ball is not round. It's not properly shaped. So each
Right.
one is misshaped in one way or another. And so then he has this whole elaborate account of like what you're learning from this game. But the one of the key points of it is you really don't have any control of how the ball rolls.
Mm.
So it's a kind of play in learning what you really can't
Yeah.
control. You're trying to get to the
Yeah.
center,
Yeah.
but you're not really in control of getting to the center, right?
No.
And no
No.
matter which way you spin it, the ball's not perfectly shaped, so it's going to go
Yes.
its own way. So here's
Yes.
my question for you. What's the connection between playfulness, that kind of like almost ornery,
Yes.
messing with things, right? Like there's something
Yes.
really, really childlike about it in playfulness
Yes.
and the kind of wisdom that we see with Cusa in terms of holding the opposites together. It seems to me it's not an accident that you have someone like him, one of the greatest minds in the Christian tradition
Yes.
and in the Western tradition, who's
Yes.
also mischievous and playful in that way. So I want to hear you talk
Yes.
about playfulness and specifically that
Ah.
kind of playfulness as what opens our spirit up to this kind of healing.
Oh, what a lovely question. Yes. And I'm sure that what I will say is things you already think yourself, or you may wish to differ with me completely. I don't know, but I think if I have one criticism of Christianity is that it doesn't have a lot of room for play and laughter. And one may well say, well, what is there to laugh about? Because this story is in one sense, a tragic story, but it's also, of course, a joy-filled story. And I think that there is something very important about the ability to let go of one's adult preconceptions and just for a while and see what happens. In fact, indulging in a game at any stage of life is fun. And I remember a therapist I had saying, tell me about your life. And I told her, and she said, it doesn't sound like there's a lot of room for fun in it. And I remember thinking, fun? Children have fun, but
Yeah.
come on. And I realized that this was very silly of me. And at that stage in my life, I needed to remember that fun is very important. And a lot of great things are discovered when we begin to play, because it's the softening of the rigidity of the boundaries of things you can and can't do and say. There are rules, but within those, you have to find that there's a lot you can't actually control because some of it is chance, as you say. And there's a concept in in Chinese called Wu Wei, which is sometimes translated as non-action. But what it really means is not striving all the time to impose your will on the way things are going, but instead to use what is coming to you in a way that furthers its end. And so, and this can be things that seem quite negative, and I've experienced this, I'm sure everybody has, that something happens in your life and you think sort of, why did that happen? It's so, and it's just ruined everything. But actually, it can be opening a door to something else, which is better. I sound like I'm being preachy here, but but I'm just really reflecting on the necessity for play, but also for humor. Humor is a much maligned thing. I mean, it can be used like all human tools. They can be used for good or ill. And indeed, we've talked about sentimentality and how that can be ruinous and oppressive and unkind. But also laughter can be unkind, but laughter can also be hugely healing. I mean, it is one of the big healers. And, I don't mind losing most things, but if I lose my sense of humor, I really want to, take a one-way trip to Switzerland, because it's the thing that actually keeps one going. And at this stage in life in particular, it's wonderful to be able to laugh at so many things that are, as people say, getting old is not for the faint-hearted, and I'm discovering that. But of course, a great treat is being able to be funny and enjoy it and laugh about it.
I heard
it seems to me it's the same picture, Chris. The binding together and the playfulness, because in a marriage, what's the general fruit of a marriage is the child. And the child is the center of that marriage all the time when they're little. And we're laughing all the time with our children.
Yes.
We're either laughing with them, or we're laughing a little bit at them, or we're laughing about our own failures to do the right thing. If you can't have that as a parent, you've got nothing, right? And that's also part of the binding, because it gives the two in the marriage a direction towards which they can. The opponent processing that creates something better comes out of having a direction that you're working towards, right?
That's a really good.
Yeah,
that's a really good
can I
insight
say
here.
something about play there, which is that play is ostensibly oppositional. So you play tennis, one of you wants to win, but really, we know that the point of the game is not necessarily who wins, but it is the game which brings people together and is enjoyable in itself. And, James Cass, a philosopher, writes about what he calls, what did he call them? Closed and open games. But there are games which are played for their own sake because they're good. And there are games that are over once you've got to the end, and that's it. The goal has been achieved. Everything stops. But here's the point: that if you're going to really enjoy a tennis match, even though both of you know that the purpose of the thing is not the winning but the playing, if you don't, to some extent, want to win, it won't be fun for either of you. So there is this built into the thing that, again, play it's oppositional, but it's not oppositional. It binds, and yet it's playing between union and division, which is where life always is. Again, to come back to my well, I mean, hardly only I think that Goethe is one of the great minds of all time, but he said, dividing the united, uniting the divided is the whole work of nature. And I think that is so important, that nature is, and if you like, nature in a bigger sense, the cosmos, is bringing things together, uniting them and building them, and then differentiating them into some great new panoply of new things, which then cohere into new wholes and so on. This is very like the picture that David Bohm unpacked in his book on the implicit order, in which he saw that everything in the cosmos followed this coming together and unpacking and then re-unfolding again. And I think this it's at the core of life. And if we only try to do one of these things, divide or only unite or only make everything like this or that, then we've made a mistake. And the most important thing is to welcome uncertainty. The two kinds of people that really worry me are fundamentalist Christians and fundamentalist Muslims on the one hand, and fundamentalist atheists on the other. They've both completely missed the point, which is that there is a very, very fruitful area which is not closed down. And that's where faith can arise. That's where life is experienced. And even Wittgenstein said, for God's sake, don't be sensible. Do all sorts of senseless things and see. So, enough anyway on that.
No. I think this is where the magic is. The magic is in our capacity for this kind of playfulness. Not just, we're made for work, play, rest, and praise. But under the pressures of modern life, instead of working, we just labor. And instead of resting, we collapse. And I think instead of playing, we seek out distractions.
Yeah.
And instead of praise, we complain.
Yes.
But I think that we can recover this. And I actually think that rest and play, ironically, are the ways back to the kind of humanity where there's enough room for creativity to flow and us to come back, kind of our heart to get its balance again. And I think that, if there's anything that we might want to call a takeaway from what our conversation has been today, it's let there be enough room in your life for mercy to get in. Let there be enough room for things to emerge that want to.
To emerge.
Things want to happen. Let them come. One of the things I've kind of stumbled into lately, it's a kind of Ignatian way of reading scripture. So in C.S. Lewis, in the Chronicles of Narnia, you have that wonderful scene where the two children fall into the painting. They fall into the painting and then fall into Narnia through the painting.
The Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So one of the things I've been practicing, Iain, with my students and in my parishes, is to take a passage of scripture, any passage, and say, let's fall into it. And let's just play a game where you've fallen into this passage and you're a character in it. You can be a character who's already written into the story. And you see out from their eyes, or you're a character that's not written in the story. They airbrushed you out of the story. Tell me what you see. What do you hear? What is happening? And the magic of that, I cannot tell you the kind of fruit that I've seen from this. This astonishing, like, it doesn't take very long for people to swim in those waters because we're made for that kind of stuff. And it's really just old wisdom. I mean, that's Ignatian way of reading, essentially. And I'm just dressing it up with that talk about falling into the painting. But people take to it. Kids take to it. Adults take to it. And I think it's little adjustments like that end up creating really wonderful space for people.
That's so important. I love that. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think this is a good place to wrap up?
No place is a good place to wrap up. Every place is a good place to wrap up.
Well, I had a little proposal.
Paradox.
I have a little proposal that I think connects everything that we're talking about here.
Okay.
And it would take me about 3 minutes to lay it out. Okay. I don't know if there would be time to discuss it. So it might just end up being a thought question to carry with us, or something for further discussion if the opportunity arises. I know you both have very, very busy calendars, but if you would indulge me, thinking about the two hemispheres of the brain, I have this picture I've had this picture for a long time of marriage. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to, I know there's a lot of but coming up, but let's just explore it a little bit. Let's think about the marriage between heaven and earth, and the marriage of the abstract and the embodied, and the marriage of the archetypal masculine with the archetypal feminine, and the marriage of the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere as a picture. Okay, so I was listening to a message this morning by Alistair Begg, and he made the comment, he was talking about identity. And one of the reasons that young people have lost their sense of identity in today's world is that they've lost the truth that our identity comes through the faithful wounds of Christ. And something went off in my brain, and I thought, I wonder if there's a way in which the corpus callosum suffers in its role of connecting the two hemispheres, and how the two hemispheres are a lot of their time and energy is spent in inhibitory fashion, and all the different things that the two hemispheres are doing in the role of going back and forth. And so I did a little research on it, and it turns out that it's very, very interesting that in speed and energy and what's the third one? Suppression of autonomy, that there is a way in which the corpus callosum suffers. So I got to thinking about how the entire story of the Bible is a marriage between heaven and earth, a marriage between the groom and the bride at the end in the wedding supper of the Lamb, and how the groom is a stabilizing force, and the logos and the seed, all of those things, bringing into the bride, who's the body of Christ, being prepared throughout history for the marriage supper of the Lamb at the end. And then, of course, the two hemispheres of the brain have to have a common goal, just as a culture has to have a common goal. Otherwise, it falls apart. So this common goal being the child on the one hand, which is the offspring, but at the same time, the common goal is the upward call. So in the two hemispheres of the brain, they have to have a common goal of maintaining allostasis for the body, and having a goal of dealing with anomaly and growth through the opponent processing that goes on in the brain. And I mean, the picture is very big picture, and I've only given you just the kernel, but I'd be interested in knowing if I'm completely off base or if there's anything there that we could play with.
Well, I think it is. Well, it is wonderful to find analogies. I think it is possible to allow them to multiply without cease. And I think that each of those marriages is a reasonable word. Certainly relationships is something that needs to be explored. But I'd have to think a hell of a lot more about whether that really has a basis in anything to do with the corpus callosum. I don't immediately see that myself. But
if I wrote something up for you with more detail, would you have the time to take a look at it?
I might do, Karen. I mean, I struggle with managing
Yes,
to
I know.
read all the things that people send to me. But by all means, if you wish to and feel like doing so, if it's not too long, I may well be able to read it. Thank you. Yes, I'd be interested anyway. Yes, yes. So, yeah.
Well, so Chris, did any of that strike you as worth pursuing?
I think it's that marriage image is, and I take Ian's point about, they only have worth if they're also limited. They can't do everything and mean anything.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. But I do think that what you're suggesting, Karen, or at least what you're intuiting, is that there are some analogies that have precedence, that they bear more weight. So every analogy has to have a limit, or it doesn't have any.
Yes.
But some analogies can bear more meaning. And I don't know enough to say, I do think you're right. Your intuition is right. That marriage is one of those analogies that can bear more than most analogies can.
Yes.
Because I do think there is a way in which so if I'm thinking theologically, I'm thinking about the communion of attributes in Christ. So if Maximus the Confessor is right and Nicholas of Cusa is right, then
Yes.
what God is doing in Christ is the communion of all things. And if we
Yeah.
take Ephesians 5 as our lead, then Paul is saying marriage is an analogy for that. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So marriage isn't quite that, but it's a pointer, one of our best pointers to this that's happening. The what Maximus will say, the uncreated and the created becoming one. You know, that there is an integration, a marriage that you're
Yes.
calling it,
Yes.
that is more than any one marriage could be, or more than the concept of marriage can handle, but it points toward this communion. So I think theologically there's
Yeah.
something to that. So
No,
for
that's
what
right.
it's
And
worth.
I think another thing I would say is that a marriage is an image of a duality that becomes, out of which something new comes into being. It's almost like an overworked analogy perhaps, but it is somewhat like a Hegelian synthesis, that two things come together and their coming together produces something new that arises that wasn't wholly present in either of the parts that went to make the whole. And that image, of course, is also the image of the Trinity. And it took me a long time, really, to realize how profound the image of the Trinity is. And indeed, it is a pre-Christian idea that, like many good ideas, Christianity has taken up and made its own. But it is a very important one. And so, yeah, let's explore the idea, but let's not, I think I don't want to wrap it up too much in the dressing of neuroscience, because I have to be very careful what I assent to there. But yeah.
Understandably so. And I don't know anything about anything, but I get an intuition about patterns because of the way art works. Because my training is in creativity and design, and so I understand how art works. And
Yes, yes,
and Dorothy Sayers has this beautiful picture of creativity being a tripartite image, that
yes,
the idea, and then there's the energy that's not only the physical energy, but the resources that are necessary to bring the idea into
yes,
being. And then
yes,
the new thing in the world has power and influence
yes,
in terms of
yes,
other people viewing it or
yes,
seeing it or using it. So you have the
yes,
idea, the energy, and the power. And
yes,
she analogizes that to the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.
yes. Well, the best image I know, which is a very concrete way of saying the same thing, came to me from a very simple Franciscan monk. And I don't know, it may be widely known, but I didn't know it. I was only at school at the time. But he said, no, the way to think of it is like, what is a book? Is it what is conceived in the mind of the writer? Or is it this copy here on the table? Or is it what happens when the book is opened and read by another person? And of course, it is all three of these things. It couldn't be a book without being all three of those things. And I think that is the most beautiful analogy I know for the Trinity.
Yeah, yeah.
But listen, I think we've got to probably end, haven't we? Because we've now been talking for 2 hours, and I don't know whether
I
whether
so
our audience.
appreciate both of you giving me that much time, and it's been so fruitful listening to you. And I'm sure that this is going to be a positive benefit to all the people that listen. So
Yes.
thank you so much. And for anybody who's listening, I hope that you will like, subscribe, and share.
Very good.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you, Ian.
Thank you,
It's
Karen.
good to be with you.
No, very good.
Okay. We'll talk later.
We'll see you later. Bye-bye.
By the way, Chris,
Yes.
I just wanted, before we leave, just to say I really enjoyed talking with you, and I definitely want to prioritize an occasion on which we can talk again, if that is all right with you.
Of course. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah.
If it's all right with Karen, she can share your email with me and I'll shoot it your way.
Yeah. That would be great. Lovely.
have a
Okay,
channel.
but
You
not
have a
just that.
channel,
But I
right,
mean,
Chris?
I think a conversation like this, I would be very happy to have again if you would be.
But yeah, it was a delight for me, Ian. I didn't want to gas you up, on the recording because people don't want to watch that. But I'm really, really grateful for you and for your work. Thank you. I really
Oh,
appreciate it.
that's very, very kind of you. Thank you.
I think you can
appreciate
tell
that.
from what I'm saying, I'm deeply in your debt, and my students hear your name all the time. I guess even my kids hear your name, so that tells you a little bit about the. Yeah, I find what you do to be a way into talking about the things that matter most, and
Okay. Yes. I
that's
hope so.
really
That's
helpful.
what I intend it to be. Yeah.
Bless you.
Thank
Let's
you
talk
very
again.
much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.